Good evening and welcome to No Place for Hate Forum on Community Policing. My name is Marie Younger Blackburn and I am your host for this evening. On behalf of this program's producer and host, No Place for Hate, Falmouth, I welcome you to this community conversation about policing in our town. In light of protests for racial justice in recent weeks following the death of George Floyd and the questions and demands posed regarding policing, No Place for Hate, Falmouth offers this conversation as a way to bring transparency and foster understanding about the Falmouth Police Department, practices, policies, and community relations. Tonight is the first of a series of community conversations on racial justice, conversations that we hope will further our mission of combating bias, promoting respect for all people, and building bridges within our community through dialogue, advocacy, and education. Welcome, welcome panel. With me, I have Chief Edward Dunn, and he is the chief of the Falmouth Police Department. He has been with the department for 40 years, starting as a seasonal officer in 1975, and he became permanent in 1981. He has served the police department in many capacities over the years. He is I would say an expert after 40 years of policing in our town. And we're just so glad to have you. He joined the police department after graduating from the Barnstable Police Academy, and he became a sergeant in 1997 and was promoted to captain in 2008, correct?
Correct.
Yes, and after being the interim chief for a while. So he has served in a number of specialty positions in the department, and he is proud to serve the town of Falmouth, his community, and he's committed to providing the best police service to residents and visitors in law enforcement. You also do a fair amount of community service with Special Olympics, Tip a Cop, the Jimmy Fund, etc. So you are very active, and we appreciate you, Chief Dunn. And we appreciate you coming on this forum so that the community at large can, have an understanding of what exactly the Falmouth Police Department does, what it doesn't do, a little bit about its history and where we're going in the future. We understand that we are facing a national problem. There's national dialogue going on around policing. However, we are handling it tonight from both a national and, most importantly, a local perspective. We want to give our residents a local perspective of what it is that we do here. So, Chief, I just want to start off by you giving a little bit of perspective about what happened after the death of George Floyd and how the dialogue about policing became more relevant to you in your police department.
Well, again, Marie, thank you, and thank you to all the other panelists, and particularly No Place for Hate, for giving me and the police department an opportunity to speak as we move forward through these really trying times. As far as what happened to George Floyd, first I just want to say, first of all, as far as a police chief and a police officer, and it echoes through this department, and it echoes through all the departments in Massachusetts, that it was absolutely awful and egregious what happened to George Floyd, and never should have happened. Absolutely never should have happened, whether the action or inaction by those officers. The protests that followed after that, I get why people were protesting. They wanted to be heard. They wanted their voices heard. And an event like this has a lot of meaning. And an event like this, where we have meaningful dialogue and understanding what's going on both sides, I believe is going to be very powerful, and it will be a turning point in changing what happens in the future.
Thank you. I want to bring in another one of our panelists right now. I'm going to bring in Megan Braga English. She was born and raised right here in Falmouth, and she makes her living as an attorney. She practices, she is a criminal defense attorney, juvenile law, domestic law, mediation, and estate planning. And like I said, she is and also she is a selectman in our town. So I think she'll bring a lot to the table in this conversation as we, delve into this area of policing. I just want to go to our first question for Police Chief Dunn, and Megan, if you want to jump into this, you can. What training has the Falmouth officers had in de-escalation? And what is Falmouth Police Department's position on chokeholds? And what percentage of calls to the Falmouth Police Department involve racism of any kind? That's a lot of question, right? Mm-hmm. And what is the magnitude of the issues here in town?
All right, let's dissect this here a little bit first, and let's go back to the first part of the question as far as what training do police officers get in de-escalation. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. First of all, our officers, when we hire our officers, they go to a 22-week academy, mm-hmm. which is sponsored by the state. It's the Municipal Police Training Council, and they put all those programs together. And during that 22 weeks, they get a little bit of everything. They also do get de-escalation training in that academy, but that's then they come back from the academy and start working in the police department, and then every year officers are required to learn de-escalation on a yearly 40-hour in-service training. So it's constant, and we even continue it in-house when twice a year we have to qualify with our firearms, and during that time de-escalation is brought back into the classroom and for more of a refresher at that point. But I can tell you our officers are constantly using de-escalation techniques. Prime example was the other night. I can tell you real quick. They had several different calls throughout the community where officers just treating people with respect, treating them with dignity, how they would want to be treated, change the situation from a violent situation to a calm situation.
The reason why I brought Megan into this conversation, I know as an attorney, you deal a lot in the courthouse. As a criminal defense attorney, you interact with police officers, and you also are the mother of a Black son, as am I, 2 Black sons here in Falmouth. And there's certain ways that we have raised our children and taught them to take a stance of de-escalation, and that's a concern of ours when our children ever get stopped or in traffic violations or what have you. So Megan, do you want to speak to that at all?
Sure. First of all, thank you to everyone, especially to No Place for Hate, for putting this together. And obviously, as everyone has said, I hope it's the first of several community conversations. It took a long time for us to get to where we are in this country. It took many centuries, and we're not going to solve it in one night of conversation. And so hopefully this will continue to be a dialogue. Usually in my capacity as an attorney, my job is to really take a look at my clients who come into the criminal court system, take a look at those police reports that are generated by Chief Dunn's officers, look for places where, my client's rights have maybe not been upheld, and try and pick those things apart. That's what a defense attorney does, to make sure that every individual gets the full protection of our Constitution, both our federal and our state Constitution. And I can say, and I think I had mentioned this to you, Marie, that in my work, and I'll just speak about my work in Falmouth, but I can say I don't see, and this is me as a white woman, but as someone who's in the court system, I don't see what I would characterize as sort of a systemic pattern of arrests. Now, again, what we see in the court are interactions between the public and the police that result in arrests. So I'm not speaking about traffic stops or other interactions that don't make it to the court, speaking just about individuals who are then charged with crimes. And what I would say is, I haven't, in the more than a decade that I've done this work, seen a particular pattern of arrests that look disproportionate to what our demographic is here in town. Obviously, there are, many interactions between the police and the public that maybe don't make it to the court system that I don't see, and the chief can comment on that further. But you're always going to have outliers. There are always situations that don't probably go the way that the chief and folks in the police department would want them to go, and there's lots of reasons why those things, why things kind of go in a negative direction. But I would say that primarily within the court system, what you see is many of the cases are really individuals who are struggling with mental health, who are struggling with substance abuse, and often with both of those things together, substance abuse that's comorbid with untreated mental health issues. And that is something that I think has really, even in the limited time I've been doing this, you've seen that increase, right? So the courts have really become a place of intervention for mental health and substance abuse. And the folks that are the front lines in many of those cases are the police, because they're called for events for people who are struggling. And, I would say on a whole, and again, I'm a defense attorney, so my job is to completely pick apart everything that every one of Chief Dunn's officers does. But on a whole, I would say that I see, what I would call appropriate interactions with the police and the folks that they deal with. Again, many of whom are struggling with those two really challenging issues. And it's something, if I just put my other hat on for a minute as a member of the select board, it's something that I think every community has to look at. Policing has changed. The way we provide mental health services have changed in this country. And obviously the opioid epidemic has really changed the need for resources and real intervention. And so it is absolutely a place where we can and should really review how we are interacting with those residents who are in need of help. Obviously, there may be a call that comes in that triggers the police to arrive, but those needs, once the police arrive, may be more along the lines of something a clinician could deal with, maybe along the lines of follow-up, helping someone get into treatment. And so those are some of the places that I'm very interested in as an elected official of the town, of improving and bringing in more of those resources, so that when we talk about de-escalation, we're not just de-escalating a particular event, but we're actually working to prevent those events from reoccurring over and over again. And I think that the Falmouth Police Department has made inroads to doing that, and there are ways that they it can be pushed further and they could be supported in that way.
Good. Okay, thank you. To follow up on that question, Chief Dunn, and what Megan is saying about the need for additional services and additional partnerships, can you talk a little bit about your partnerships, maybe in the mental health community, the addiction community, that helps to alleviate some of your work? Yes.
Yeah, no, and Megan is right on point with that. And I mean, you all read the papers and you see the news. This is going back to, we'll start with the addiction piece here. This is going back to 2012, when the opioid addiction really took flight throughout the country, but particularly here in this community. And in the very beginning, I was getting phone calls that, people telling me, Chief, you have to do something. People are dying.
Mm-hmm.
And basically my answer to that was, it's not just a police problem. And by the time law enforcement gets involved with an individual who is overdosed, it's way too late. Those services or that help should have happened long before that time. If they're overdosed, they're in some serious crisis. But fortunately, we ended up partnering with Gosnell, and we also had a forum here in Falmouth where we brought in the clergy, we brought in doctors, we brought in Gosnell, we brought in people who were in recovery, and we had a really good conversation. Probably for, I think there were up at the Seacrest, we had a nice conversation and came up with some ideas of what we could do to help improve the quality of life and help these people who are in crisis. And what we've done in the Falmouth Police Department is I have several officers who go out with a clinician from Gosnell, and we do follow-up with people who have overdosed. If you've overdosed this week, you're gonna get a visit. The officer is in plain clothes. We drive up in a plain cruiser, but we go there with a clinician from Gosnell. And I can tell you, since we've been doing this since 2013, my officers will tell you they've never been turned away. The person doesn't always ask for help the first time or the second time, but we continue, and we've gotten many people services that they need. The other piece that we were doing is, we communicate with the families. We communicate, because a lot of times families have cut ties with them because they're at their wit's end. The person may be stealing from them because they're trying to feed their addiction. So by working with the families, we've been able to get them court committed to facilities to save their lives. And we've had people come out and say, thank you for doing that. On the mental health piece, I would say a good 75 to 80% of our calls for services either deal with mental health or addiction. That's large. Our policing has changed drastically over the years. What we've done with the mental health piece is same thing. We just copied what we did with the addiction. We've partnered with Falmouth Human Services and Mark Abbott, and we do exactly the same thing. If we interact with someone who has a mental illness or mental health issues, we do follow-up investigations with them. Plainclothes officers, we go to the homes, we speak to the families, and Mark and Susie Hoffman and her group, Falmouth Human Services, make them aware of services that are available they didn't know were available. So we really try hard to do that. One other piece that I thought was really important, as you saw on my resume, I'm a member of the International Police Chiefs Association. And a couple years ago, I took a pledge, as did many chiefs in Massachusetts. It was called the One Mind Campaign, and I would suggest to people, go online, look up the One Mind Campaign to see what it is. And what we did was we took a pledge to basically come up with three things. And it was a clearly defined, sustainable partnership with one or more community health organizations. We did that. We have that with Falmouth Hospital, and of course, Susie Hoffman's our main piece. The second piece was develop and implement model policies for addressing police response to people who are in crisis and mental illness. We've done that. And the third, which was a big task, but we got it done, was to train 100%, certify 100% of our department in mental health awareness and mental health first aid. And then with 20% of those officers are trained for crisis intervention team. And we have successfully met all those goals. Excuse me. We met all those goals through the International Police Chiefs Association. In fact, we got an award, which I'm glad Megan's on here. We're going to be presenting it to the selectmen to make them aware. But that is huge for the community, because that way there we know we're giving the best service to those people who are in need. One other thing I just want to talk real quick about that I've put in my budget, not in the main budget, but a goal in my budget. As you may be aware, we're trying to rebuild the police department. So once we have enough officers here, my final goal would be to have what's called a community action team. And what that would entail is a police supervisor with 1 or 2 officers and a clinician embedded right in the police department. So instead of doing follow-ups, we would go out and proactively assist the homeless, the addiction, and the mental health, people with mental health issues, but do it proactively. And that would follow a similar program that we have with domestic violence, where we have an advocate in the police station. So that's my goal as we move forward in the future, to create a community action team.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very useful information. I think it's going to take a collaboration of community partnerships to be able to effectively police in any community. I want to bring Reverend Will Mebane in and introduce him. He is the newly appointed rector of St. Barnabas Episcopal Church. I think you've been there for a couple of years now, correct? Yes. And yeah, he comes to us with an extensive background. He has a Master's of Divinity degree, along with an award for excellence in preaching from the Divinity School of Yale University. You had a quote in your bio that I really, really liked, and it said, "I have yet to meet a cause for justice in which I do not feel compelled to be involved as a Christian." And I think we are in the midst of a collective call for justice. The country, the world is asking for justice for people of color and marginalized people in general. So I'm just glad that you, as a part of the faith community, sees that as your primary goal as a Christian, to be able to stand up against injustice. And I know you had some questions for the chief regarding immigration and their stance, or what stance are they taking as a community for people who are undocumented in the community, or picked up or identified in the community. And I just want to give you a chance to expound on that and say more about yourself.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. Grateful for this opportunity, particularly as a still member of the community here in Falmouth. But before I go to the question about immigration, I just want to follow up, if I may, with what Chief Dunn just said about the percentage. 75% of the calls to the police department to which they respond are around mental health issues, addiction issues. And well, I completely support your goal for the action group or action team, I think you called it. That sounds like that falls right in line with what people are calling for around the country when they call for defunding the police. And you know, people aren't really interested in abolishing police departments per se, but recognizing that police departments have to deal with so many social issues. And so I wonder what the chief might think about shifting now some of the funds that are allocated to the police department, instead of hiring more police officers, hiring now more of individuals that can address some of those social needs in the community. And then I'll come back to the immigration question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Reverend. Great question. I mean, would we like to shift it? We would. But that being said, and it goes back to what we talked about with the de-escalation, when we get those phone calls, those people are in serious crisis. A lot of times they're violent, and they really do need to be talked down. And that's what I'm saying. Most of that, when our calls are related to mental health, it also ties into a domestic that happened, and there's violence involved in that. And working with Susie Hoffman's group at Falmouth Human Services and everything else, they're not going to go to those calls, nor should they, because of the chances of harm to them. So the partnership really works, and it's worked since probably 14. It's worked really, really well. And by just, like I say, expanding on it, similar to like we have with the domestic violence advocate here. We handle the domestic violence, and then it gets pushed down to the advocate who deals with the victim and helps walk the victim through. So when I talk about the community action team being proactive, we would be going out, seeking these people proactively before we get to that violent stage. But by having the clinician here working with the police officer, I believe is a good format to do it. And there are communities out there that are already doing it. I'm not inventing this, and I'm just trying to model some of the ones that have worked. And so that's my take on that.
Well, thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. And as I said, I'm encouraged to hear you say you want to expand the action team there. So the question that has been on my mind is regarding immigration. People may not be aware, I certainly was surprised myself, that there are a number of immigrants here in Falmouth in the Upper Cape. And I know that the federal government has a couple of programs to the Priority Enforcement Program, I guess what they call PEP. And then I've been reading about the 287G program. I'm sure you're aware of those, that call for local police departments to assist ICE, Immigration and Custom Enforcement, with identifying what they call illegal aliens. I prefer to refer to them as undocumented individuals, but having local police departments assist in identifying and rounding up folks who fall into that category so they can be deported. And I just wonder, again, going back to Marie's introduction to me, my teaching, my Judeo-Christian teaching says that I'm supposed to welcome the stranger, and there are no exceptions to that. And so it bothers me when I hear the government targeting people who are here, perhaps undocumented, for deportation and asking the local police departments to assist them. So how is the Falmouth Police Department involved in any of that?
Great question. Apparently you haven't seen my flyer that I put out a couple of years ago, and it's called it's on our webpage, but I'll be sure to bring some by for you, for Reverend, too, so you can have them, so you can pass them out. It's called A Message from the Police Chief regarding DHS and ICE Secured Community Program. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read a little bit of the summary piece on it here, and it's exactly the stance of the Falmouth Police Department. And I put these out probably sometime around, I think, 15 or 16, when ICE was going around rounding everybody up. And in fact, I even got a visit from the local ACLU, who basically had the same questions that you had, sir. And they came in to visit the different police departments across the Cape, because we're being the second largest town on Cape Cod. And when they came in, we had a great conversation. But before the conversation got started, I handed them my flyer, which I already had and we're already disseminating through the community. And we even give them to our J1 workers. They read the flyer, and when they were done, they said, "We really don't have any other questions, Chief. Thank you." So if you got a minute for 1 second here, let me just really quick, I'll do a real quick summary of it. The Falmouth Police Department will not be involved in any type of profiling, targeting of any specific ethnic group or presumed national class because of the implementation of the DHS ICE Secured Community Program. Local law enforcement agencies, including the Falmouth Police Department, have no authority to enforce federal immigration law and the implementation of the Secured Community Program. Finally, the members of the Falmouth Police Department we remain committed to our community and will continue to treat all that we encounter with the utmost degree of respect and dignity. So that's basically the summary of it all, but it's a 3-page flyer. Again, if people listening and watching, please go to our webpage. It is on our webpage, our Falmouth Police webpage. You can read it there. We have these flyers, Town Hall. We have them, I've given some to Nell Fields before. I gave some to the rabbi before. I apologize for not getting some to you, sir.
I look forward to receiving them. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you for that useful information. And anyone who is would like to take a look at one of those flyers, please just contact Chief Dunn and go pick up a flyer. I have a second part of the question about de-escalation, Chief. Would the department be willing to develop a statement that ensures that de-escalation is a core tenet of the Falmouth Police Department?
Not quite sure I understand the question. When you mean just a public statement?
I suppose.
Yeah.
The question came in.
No, absolutely. It's what we do. I mean, and as I said, our officers are becoming really good at it. Never mind the training that they get, but with the number of incidents dealing with, like I say, the people who are in crisis. Absolutely, sure.
Sure. Okay, great. I'd like to bring in our next panelist, Onjalé Scott Price. She is the Chief Operating Officer of Mebane Imaging. She's here representing the scientific community in Woods Hole and herself. She's the Acting Director of the Woods Hole Partnership Education Program, PEP, internship. She is an active member of the Woods Hole Diversity Committee and a member of the Falmouth Affordable Housing Committee, and involved in multiple organizations here in Falmouth in the Woods Hole community. So welcome, Onjalé, and we look forward to hearing from you. Would you like to pose a question that you had, I know you had a couple of questions, and I just would love to hear one of them.
Sure. Thank you all for having me. Chief Dunn, I'm curious about the number of police officers that actually live in Falmouth and those that don't live in Falmouth, where they live, and if there are any incentives for police officers to actually live in Falmouth. And I realize that here in Falmouth, as a member of the Affordable Housing Committee, that affordable housing is an issue, and if that also has anything to do with if there are more police officers who do not live in Falmouth.
Great question, thank you. Let me just back up a second on the hiring process. When we hire, we're a civil service community, and we hire off what's the state civil service exam. When we first, there's two portions of the civil service exam. There's the statewide exam that we can ask for a list, and names would come down from all over the state. And then there is known what is the residential list. So when we first hire our police officers, we hire them off what is known as the residential list. So we are hiring Falmouth residents right off the start when we hire police officers. To answer your question right now, we have 58 officers, 58 officers in the Falmouth Police Department. Of the 58, 16 of them live out of town, whether they live in, and they have to live, according to civil service, 10 miles as the crow flies from the town border. So they can only go as far as, I think, Plymouth. And we have officers that live in Mashpee. We have officers that live in Bourne, Sandwich, and I think we have some that live in this right near the borders or whatever, Plymouth. As far as an incentive, no, there is. You mean monetary incentive? Is that what you're talking about, or?
Monetary incentive, or perhaps help with them making a down payment for a house to stay permanently in Falmouth, or any other type of incentive that would keep them living in the Falmouth community as they work as police officers?
Not that I'm aware of at this point in time. I say yes and no. I mean, I know there's been some banks who have come in and dropped off flyers over times about getting mortgages for homes in Falmouth or whatever. But yeah, nothing direct. There's no monetary value or anything like that for them.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chief. I know I'd like to know, and maybe others would like to know, is what percentage of your department are people of color, and what are you doing to bring more people of color onto your department? Is there a program maybe starting in the elementary school that would lead them to want to get into that career?
Okay, again, the number of people of color that we have in the department right now, we have one right now. We had several before, but they've either retired or, as you've seen in the paper, some people have been dismissed from the police department. But currently, right now, we have one person of color. Again, we have to follow when we do the hiring. the civil service format. And currently right now, civil service, the only ones who get anything preferential, meaning they will go to the top of the list, would be if you have a veteran status. Everybody else, it's on their raw score. But what we are doing, because we would like to have a diverse working force here in the police department, is when civil service gives their entry exam every 2 years. So it'll be another year from April when there's the next exam. But what we do, working with HR here, Human Resources here in Falmouth, we send out flyers. And we send out flyers to the Community Action Committee of Cape Cod and the Islands, the Cape Verdean Club, Cape Organization for Rights of the Disability, CORD, Division of Unemployment, Barnstable County, the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe, the NAACP of Cape Cod, NAM Vet Association, Job Training and Employment, and the Portuguese American, to let them know that there's a civil service exam going on and that the Falmouth Police Department is looking to hire. So we try to get that word out there because they might have missed the, you know, if they're not following the civil service exam, following on the website or any flyers somewhere, they might have missed it. So we decided several years ago that we would send flyers out to these organizations. Cape Cod Community College is one also that we send it to. And as far as what we can do locally is every year Falmouth High School has a career day program. And we have many young students come into the police department, and we spend several hours with them going over what the Falmouth Police Department's about and what law enforcement is about. And these are kids or young adults who are, you know, getting ready to go off to college and maybe choose a career. So they kind of already have an idea they might want to get involved in law enforcement. So to do that. Some other pieces that we do, and we have hired people from it, is we have what is known as the Citizens Police Academy. And that is something that we've done for over 25 years here, where we invite the citizens into our police station for 10 weeks, one night a week, to learn about their police department. We are very transparent. We are very open. They get to see what we have for equipment. We go over different things like motor vehicle stops. We talk about operating under the influence, sexual assaults, burglaries, canine demonstrations. We go through all that, but what seems to be the most popular piece is they actually get to do a ride along with the police officer. They go out on the street and see for about 4 hours and see exactly what a police officer does. And we've been able to, some people who have been on the fence, young adults, have come that way. But the big piece is it's a great partnership with the community. It opens the eyes of the community so they really get to see what the Falmouth Police Department is all about. And we haven't, because of the COVID, we had hoped to have one this past spring, but because of the COVID, we weren't able to hold that. So depending on how we move forward here in the future with COVID, what it looks like and what we can do, we will again have that program in the future. And I would invite anybody who's watching this or any of the panelists, please come and take that course, and you'll get a real view of what the Falmouth Police Department is all about. We also took it to a different level also, to what we call a Junior Police Academy. And that is over at the Morse Pond School. And it's always full. The kids always sign up, they want to come, or the parents sign them up, and they want them to come. And we get it for that age group, that age grade 5 and grade 6, to teach them safety, like internet safety and things like that, and also talk about law enforcement. So start them young to try to recruit them early.
Sure, that's great. I just want to bring in our next panelist, Bill Hough, and he is the publisher at Falmouth Publishing Company, and you've been at that for 38 years, I see. And so you must have a wealth of history here in Falmouth in terms of police relations, you know, that how things have morphed, how things have changed, how things have gotten better or maybe worse. I'm sure you have a lot to say. And do you have a question that you'd like to pose to Chief Dunn at this time?
Sure. I have a couple of sort of related back-to-back questions, but first of all, yes, I have seen a great deal of change in the police department. I'd say it's all for the positive. I've seen some pretty gruesome things going back 15, 20 years. And you haven't seen anything like that for quite some time. But a couple of questions for you, Chief. And one of them is, when you bring someone into the department, is there any kind of psychological profiling that's done of them?
Yeah, part of the hiring process, when we hire them, they are sent for a psychological exam. Prior to them even day one, when we go through the interview process, they're interviewed. We do a complete background on them, a very in-depth background. Our investigators spend weeks looking into the background of these people. And as all of you, when you apply for a job, you put a reference down. We don't talk to the reference. Why would you? Because that reference knows you're putting them down. We go beyond that. We really dig depth into their background. Once we're done with that and we give them a job offer, we have to give them a job offer first. Once they have the job offer, there is a physical exam and there is a psychological exam every officer goes through.
All right. Then the back end of the question is, a reader sent a couple letters a few weeks ago about the union contracts. If you do end up with a bad apple in the department and with 57 people, it's possible. How difficult is it to remove a person who has a clear problem?
Well, again, if we open an investigation, and as you know, since I've been chief, I have fired I think it's 7 officers. We've had different events. It's all in how you do the backgrounds, and it's like any other investigation. You do a thorough investigation, and you have evidence, the preponderance of the evidence, and the officers can then, they go through several different hearings. They have a local hearing here, and that is usually with the town manager because he is the hiring authority. And then the outcome of whatever that is, they do have a right to appeal to either civil service or an arbitrator. And we bring in witnesses, we bring in evidence, and the town has an attorney that represents the town and presents the case. And I hope that answers your question.
I think so. I mean, I think the concern is that there'd be a case as in New Jersey not long ago, and that some guy got bounced around a whole number of departments, and it could happen because of the union contract. But anyway, I just wanted to comment on one other thing is, at the enterprise, we have 47 employees, and we have 1 black person, 1 Cape Verdean, and through over 30 years, I think we've had 1 other black reporter, a black woman. We cast our nets as broad as we can when we hire people, and we simply don't get the application. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's there's nothing, I don't think, premeditated about it. It's just the way it falls.
And the thing is with policing, prior to any of this happening, the economy was really good. So those people weren't going for municipal jobs. We were already in a crisis for hiring police officers. This is prior to George Floyd's murder. We were already in a crisis. And when I say we were in a crisis, for instance, on the civil service exam, they used to use Durfee High up in, I think it's in Fall River. There would be thousands of people going in there to take that exam. Now there's hundreds. And our list, when we ask for that residence list, when I go back to talk about the residence list, I know at one time, because I used to do background investigations, I know at one time there could be up with 50 or 60 names on it. Our last 2 lists, not this previous list, the list before that, there were 14 names on it. This last list, there were 12. I mean, excuse me, there were 20 something, 20, don't quote me on that, in the 20s. So the numbers have gone down, and kind of what we attribute to a lot of that is, the economy being well, you can make more money in the private sector. So yeah, we do try.
Mhm. I want to bring Reverend Mebane back in. He is raising his hand, so I know he wants to say something.
Well, thank you, Marie. Yeah, the chief's comment just reminded me of a report that I read. It's been a few years now about hiring in police departments. The FBI did a study, and they found that white supremacist, white nationalist organizations were intentionally being recruited by some local police departments. And the white nationalists and white supremacists were intentionally trying to get jobs in police departments. And I wonder, as you were talking about your screening, is there any way and a mechanism for your department to screen out such individuals were they to apply for a position in Falmouth?
It's, as I said, Reverend, we do a very thorough background. We check everything. We check records from all over the country. It's called a triple I. It means something that escapes my memory right now, but we run checks in the computer system, the NCIC system, which is the criminal justice system that we have access to. We talk to families, we talk to neighbors. We spend a lot of time talking to a lot of people. And again, on some of that, it goes back to what Mr. Huff said, what Bill said, was that a lot of that comes out in the psychologicals too, if you ask them the right questions. And we have a phenomenal doctor who does that. He has many years. He's particularly involved in law enforcement. That's what his specialty is. And so, yeah, we would definitely, hopefully, weed that individual out in the background process.
Marie, may I comment just briefly on the issue about drawing in a more diverse workforce? This is something that the town of Falmouth as a whole, it goes beyond the police department, really struggles with. Every, institution in our community, whether it's the schools, town staff, police department, fire, it struggles to really bring in a more diverse workforce. And there's so many factors to that. Onjalé pointed out one about housing. That is a huge component. You can talk about diversity of all kind, particularly for young folks who want to come here and make start a family, make a living here. It's very hard to find appropriate housing. Another piece of it is really looking at what type of message is this community sending out to people from diverse backgrounds. Do we strike people as a welcoming community? When they come to this community, how are they received when they are, walking our streets, going into stores, interacting with the police? What are the experiences that people of color, people from various backgrounds are having, and how are we perceived from folks outside of our community that we would love to bring in that diversity of experience, that geographical diversity for folks to bring in, really enriching the community. And so it's something that we've talked about at a town level. It remains one of those pieces that I think, you have to come at it from so many different angles. And it is something that we, I will just say, I think that we have not made much progress on and really need to make a priority because, we just keep coming back to the issue of sort of the demographics of our community and how that drives a lot, whether you're talking about race or age or sort of cultural ethnic background, we have to look at the way that we are messaging who Falmouth is and who the voices are that are being heard. We have a lot of diversity. I mean, the numbers are small, but this is a community of immigrants, as the Reverend has pointed out. We have a strong immigrant population, Portuguese, Cape Verdean, Brazilian, Jamaican. Those are just a few of sort of the larger communities that we have here, but we tend not to, that tends not to be recognized. And I think that we really, as a, just speaking as a town official, need to think about the ways and the voices that are being represented or seen as representative of our community. And we have a lot within that we should be raising up, but also as we're looking beyond our borders, it's something that goes beyond just the police department. We're really falling short, across the board, is in my opinion.
Yes, please, Chief.
Yeah, Maria, so the other thing is, and I've been here for 40 years, so I've seen a lot of different changes. And I worked for a chief that was Cape Verdean here. I worked for a sergeant here in detectives that was Cape Verdean. We had many Cape Verdean working in this police department at one time. But again, it's very hard to draw them into the field today. And I don't have that answer, but we're going to continue trying. But the other thing is the reason I will publicly say that we don't have a lot of the problems here, it is because of the 57 educated, well-trained professional men and women we have in this police department. We work really hard from the day we hire them to the day we send them to the academy, and the amount of training that we give them so that they are professionals and they treat people that way. And like Megan was saying, whether they're a resident or a visitor. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to read the mission statement of the Falmouth Police Department. And this is not a mission statement that was picked off the internet because it sounded good and it was fancy. Back in 2008, when we were kind of reorganizing the department, we had a gentleman come in and we had a working group. And this mission statement is from the men and women of the Falmouth Police Department, and it stands even today. And it is the mission of the Falmouth Police Department to safeguard the lives and property of all people within the community. Our mandate is to do so with honor and integrity, while at all times conducting ourselves with the highest ethical standards. That came from the men and women of the Falmouth Police Department. We drafted that, and it's still today, and I really do believe they take that with pride. And it is posted. It's not something that's in a book somewhere. It's posted on the walls in this police station. It's even in my office back there on the shelf, and it can be looked at any time. And I really believe that means something. And that is how we treat the community of Falmouth.
Out of respect to people that sent questions into No Place for Hate, I just want to make sure that we cover some of those and then get back to some of your questions as well. Someone asked what percentage of calls to the Falmouth Police Department involve racism of any kind, and what is the magnitude of the issue here in town?
They're very low, Marie. I can't give you the percentage number, but I can just say recently there's been an uptick. And that uptick is, you may have read in the paper, we've had some racial and anti-Semitic flyers. They were placed in a person's mailbox. Black Lives Matter signs have been stolen in the community. I think we've had 4 incidents. And just last week, we had some racial slurs written or carved into one of the parking booths up at Old Silver Beach. And I can only say that, we can go for years without anything like this, but my sense is, just with everything going on in the country, is why we've seen a little bit of an uptick on that.
Okay, does anybody want to speak personally to that question? Has anyone in your roles in leadership received any complaints or thoughts from people, your neighbors, your friends, regarding race in your community? Okay, Onjalé.
So the person whose Black Lives Matter signs were stolen and the anti-Semitic and hate mail put in their mailbox is someone that I know, and I've talked to them quite a bit about this. And this person is a person of color, but they're not Black, and so their thought was, if this is happening to me and I'm just putting up signs in my yard, what do the Black members of my community deal with in this community, whether on a regular basis or just on one-off occasions. And so it started an interesting conversation with even people who I consider allies and other people of color about the differences in how Black people in the community are treated versus other ethnicities. And so I think that has started a very interesting conversation, and even amongst people who feel like their eyes are open to these issues, to still think about how differently race plays out depending on how people perceive you and the color of your skin.
Mhm.
I would say that certainly in my nearly 2 years here in Falmouth, and we chose Falmouth, my wife Ronnie and I chose Falmouth, accepted the call here because we were familiar with Falmouth because we used to vacation here 30 odd years ago, and we always found it as a welcoming place. But I've had in the last year and a half, more than almost 2 years, as I said, incidents where I was made aware of the fact that I'm Black, African American, where I've been profiled. Fortunately, Chief, not by any of the members of your force. I'm grateful for that. But it is something that's always in my mind, always something I am thinking about, concerned about, and that it is a possibility that it might happen. You know, we have a Black Lives Matter sign on our home here, and I'm frankly just waiting for the day when someone's going to tear it down, or throw a rock at it, or vandalize it in some way. And I'll share also, it was with the, and this is not to cast aspersion at the fire department at all, but we had a fire alarm here on the campus of St. Barnabas one evening. I was coming back from a late meeting in Hyannis, and I pulled up on the campus and there were fire engines all over the place. And I walked up, and the firefighter said to me, "Oh, I'm glad you're here. You're the caretaker, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I take care of the souls of the people who come here." And so I just share that as an example of sort of implicit bias that is in all of us, and that causes me to ask the chief what kind of training, when you talk about the training members of the force receive, what kind of training are they getting around implicit bias, for example?
Great. I'm glad it wasn't my department there, Reverend. Thank you. Yes, again, our offices have all had fair and impartial policing and implicit bias in the academies and in the in-service. And in-service several years ago, it was just given again for a number of reasons. One, for dealing with race, as we talk about, and the other is same thing for homelessness and the whole mental health. It was all program, all tied into about people having biases and things like that. So yes, our offices have been trained. If I could just go back on the reference to things being stolen or vandalized and things like that, you need to report it to the police department. We take it very serious. We investigate it all, because I have heard from people before who said, "Oh yeah, I had my sign, or it was vandalized," or something to that effect. If we don't know about it, we can't investigate it. So I would, everybody listening out there, if you have some vandalism or you have something stolen, you need to report it to us, please, so that we can investigate it.
I think that's an important point. And I had that conversation, I think, with you, Chief, and other chiefs in other communities, is that you don't know unless people report. Traffic stops, when things are inappropriate and you get stopped, you don't get a citation, you may have something said to you that's inappropriate, and you kind of go about your day, but you keep it in your memory and you recount these things and you tally them up, but you're not reporting them. So how can those things be rectified, and how can those things be changed if they're not reported? And that leads me to another question. So when things are reported, who has the authority to change the use of force policy or other general policies for the department?
That falls on my shoulders. I will tell you that our policies, we get them from, we follow the guidelines of the Massachusetts Accreditation Commission. which has over 159 different policies and standards. And these are all standards that have stood the time through court and other litigations. They are the best practices that are out there. Our use of force policy is 13 pages. And I'll tell you right now, if somebody wants the use of force policy, just email me. It's a public record. I will send it to you. I've already sent it out, I think, like 3 or 4 times to different agencies and different individuals that wanted to know about our use of force policy. And again, our officers have to read it. And we know they read it because it's in a computer system. And if they don't read it, we know they didn't read it. But that use of force, again, gets brought up every year when we do our firearms qualification. We just don't go out and shoot guns and qualify. It's a whole process, and there's a training portion of it, and that training portion of it is going over the de-escalation, going over the use of force policy, what you can do, what you can't do. So as far as the policy is concerned, it is up to date, and it's a good policy. And right now, it is a policy that most police departments across the Commonwealth or across the country have in place, and I've vetted it through attorneys, through the Mass Chiefs Association, and through the Mass Accreditation Commission.
I think Megan spoke about this a little bit, and just want to ask you, someone else sent in a question. Does the Falmouth Police Department collect demographic data, and can we access that data?
Oh, you're still muted, Chief.
Sorry, I was getting good at it. Yes, we do. We collect demographic data on arrest reports, and we correct it from motor vehicle citations. And as far as can you get it, it's public record. All you have to do is send us an email requesting that data, and we will get it to you.
Marie, may I just make a quick, I just wanted to go back to something that was just discussed, in terms of this differentiation we make around different types of bias or discrimination, and the very particular sort of anti-Blackness that is somehow, because of the history of this country in particular, and because of who we are as a country and the legacy of enslavement, that I do think when we have these conversations, we are talking about, sort of writ large about bias and about racial justice, and about the ways that police interact with people of color. But I do think that there is, in this moment, in the conversation we're really having at a national level, does raise, that there is a particular way that Black people in this country, have been viewed, and we see those with those amazing studies that folks do, or even people of color have that when they do those implicit bias testing, that there's, even for folks that are looking at pictures that are representative of themselves or people that look like them, that there is bias so deeply embedded in us because of the way, from sort of the moment in terms of curriculum and the way that society is structured. So, we're talking about really, I think, delving into the way that we can, we all have our individual work to do, and then we're talking about the institutional bias that are built into institutions and how we can affect that. And I think that's where, a community like Falmouth is well positioned, because we are small enough where we, I think, our institutions are not that big, 57, 58 officers. That's not it's not as daunting as departments that have hundreds or even thousands of offices. Same for, school, for town, elected officials, town staff, everybody, fire, the fire department. I think we are situated in a way that we can really make change if we articulate what it is we're looking to change and the ways that we're going to go at it. And just, briefly on that, there is going to be in the fall a collaboration between the select board and the school department to bring in some facilitators to really talk about racial justice and implicit bias. And so we're trying to, not just have those platitudes where everyone's going to say, yes, we need racial justice, we need to undo bias, and then everybody goes about their business. So we are really thinking about ways that we can affect the institutions in our community and the people that are part of those institutions and systems. So just from a town level, I want folks to know that that's something that we are, taking seriously, going to try and think of more ways that we can, really address that. And town meeting just voted to create a position for someone who is going to work both in the town and with the schools around issues of racism, diversity, and inclusion. And, that is going to be, we used to have that with Dr. Spivey. We're reworking that position a bit, but there's going to be support and money and a position behind really trying to move the conversation beyond just conversation and into something that's, really impactful.
Thank you, Megan. That's important work. I know that it takes a lot to undo bias, and it's not a one and done, particularly in the police force. I know if you send your officers to a training, how often do they go, Chief Dunn? Maybe once a year?
Training is ongoing. There's all sorts of specialty training and things like that. But under Massachusetts, they are required every year 40 hours. But we do training in-house. We have specialty trainings that they go to. So it's an ongoing process, and we always welcome training.
Right, because I'm told that's a lot of work, to undo biases. I have another question that came in from one of our the members that sent in questions to No Place for Hate. So this is a little twofold and a little complicated maybe. An example of the best and worst handling of an issue with a person of color. How would they improve that today? That's the first part of the question. Chief Dunn, I don't know if you understood that. Do you have an example of the best and worst handling of an issue with a person of color? And how would they improve that today? And the second part of it is, what, if any, consequences were given to the officer in that case? And had any officer been fired or demoted as a consequence of his or her actions? And does it appear in their record? And does that record follow the officer?
As far as the first part, nothing comes to mind. I mean, because you're talking something to dealing with race or dealing with a person of color. And I can't think of an incident on that. As far as have people been fired? Yes, they've been fired for other things. Nothing to do with, police brutality or things like that. It's been for other causes. As far as does their record follow them? It's in their personnel record here in the Falmouth Police Department, and then when they are gone, their record goes to the personnel department, and it's held for many years. So if someone does a background on them, if they decided they wanted to go to another police department, I mean, that information is available. We have gotten calls on people who have left, well, people who have been fired. They didn't leave. People who have been fired or released here when they were looking for jobs elsewhere, and we have shared that information with the inquiring department.
Okay. Reverend, would you like to add something to that?
Well, I just wanted to follow up with the chief's comment there. I'm glad to hear that he can't recall any specific cases. I know I have had a person in Falmouth share with me an experience they had with the Falmouth Police Department that was around race. It goes back several years, but I won't. I'll leave it to them to share that if they would ever want to do that. But the question that causes me to think about something that's been in the media, in the news a lot lately since the murder of George Floyd. And I thank you, Chief, for referring to it as a murder. Thank you for that. And that's qualified immunity. It's not a phrase, a term I knew much about. And so I've been trying to educate myself more about it. But as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm off base, police officers are given a certain degree of immunity protection, and that makes it very difficult for prosecutors and judges to hold them accountable for the things they have done in the line of duty that may have been due to racism within the officer. And so there's been lots of talk now, and I know the NAACP is very involved in this, trying to get police officers, trying to get, I guess, the state to come up with some new legislation around that. Can you speak to what qualified immunity is and give us an idea of where you stand with this discussion?
Qualified immunity, and I know Megan can chime in on that as an attorney. It is very confusing, and I have a definition that it's short, it's sweet, it's from the International Police Chiefs Association, and it kind of best explains it. That if I just read this definition that they came out with, because it is confusing. It's confusing to police officers, it's confusing to lawyers, it's confusing to judges. So let me just read this, and then I'll continue answering your question. What is qualified immunity? Qualified immunity provides a police officer the protection from civil lawsuits so long as their conduct does not violate clearly established laws or constitutional rights of which a reasonable officer would have known. Further, qualified immunity does not protect individuals from recovering damages from police officers who knowingly violated an individual's constitutional rights. So you can still sue a police officer, and the reason that there's qualified immunity is an essential part of policing. It allows police officers to respond to incidents without pause, make split-second decisions, and rely on the current state of law making those decisions. Because as you know, we have to make split-second decisions sometimes. So that's why the qualified immunity is there. Where if it's it's a very confusing law. Yes, the Senate had hearings this past week, and they are looking to not do away with qualified immunity. They're looking to change some of the language in it. And it's in an 87, 89-page document, which I'm still reading.
And Chief, where do you stand on that? Have you made a decision where you stand on it? Because I've seen some chiefs make really hard stance against.
I really do believe we need something to protect our officers who aren't out there violating the law. Our good officers who are out there doing their job every day and have to make those split-second decisions. And if it's a decision that went awry because it was just a mistake, and for him to lose their home and their family and everything else, it's not fair. I mean, first of all, let's go back to George Floyd. There's no way qualified immunity is going to fit in that. That was a criminal act. Qualified immunity doesn't even come into play there for a murder. So without qualified immunity, what you're going to have is officers second-guessing themselves. What you're going to see is a lot more officers hurt if they get away with it, or officers killed, because they're going to second-guess themselves. Similar to what happened with up in Weymouth. I mean, when you pull up to a scene and somebody's holding a rock, do you think you're going to die from a rock? And when Sergeant Chesna was hit with that rock, the suspect then came over and took his gun and killed him. So, we're in a very dangerous field where you have to make those split-second decisions, and you have to be protected somewhere along the line. And then this qualified immunity that I just read is not just for police officers, it's for all governmental workers, nurses, teachers, social workers, firefighters, if they made a mistake in an ambulance or something to that effect. Can you still get money out of this? Yes, there's still avenues to get that, and maybe Megan can chime in on that a little bit on the legal end.
If I could just speak, yeah, let me just say this. I think the issue with qualified immunity is that it's less about the concept, because we understand that there needs to be some type of, police officers, firefighters we don't stand generally the public in the same shoes as they do in terms of, they're required to respond to events. We as citizens do not have that requirement. I can stand by and watch some terrible event happen. I do not have the responsibility to respond. A police officer, a firefighter in their work does. So, I understand that they are situated differently. I think the problem is something larger, which is how do we, and this goes beyond police, how do individuals, how do prosecutors, how do judges, how do juries understand the concept of it, and why do we draw lines in certain situations that goes back to bias and prejudice, where a scenario that is presented to a prosecutor or presented to a jury in which the alleged victim of that behavior by a police officer looks a certain way, and you have a set of decisions that comes down, right? Like, absolutely, this particular alleged victim was, a white woman, age 43. I'll just pick myself, and there's a different application of that concept of qualified immunity versus the way it's applied to, say, a young Black man who has, a motor vehicle stop and things go in a different direction with the police. I don't think the concept of qualified immunity is the problem, although I think it can be clarified and tweaked, as much as it is the application of that concept throughout a system that doesn't, really view participants in that system, defendants or alleged victims, or, they don't perceive them the same based on things that we all, have been talking about, based on race, based on ethnicity, based on your immigrant status. So, to me, I'm glad the legislature is going to take a look at it. And I think we can always clarify language around the law. We can always fine tune, but I think the problem is bigger, which is in some ways unfortunate because it can't be fixed with just some legislative language. It's a larger problem with how we apply that concept to the folks who have interactions with the police.
Sure. Thank you, Megan. We're getting close to the end, so I want to give our panelists the opportunity to ask one more question before we close, and I'm going to start with you, Onjalé.
So over the past few months, I've been wrestling with my own feelings about the state of the world, the state of our government, policing, being a Black woman, thinking about being a mother in a community that is predominantly white. I have not had any interactions with the police. I'm thankful for that. And so I wonder, Chief Dunn, how do you feel with everything going on? As a police officer, as a person, I don't know you personally. I assume you have some sort of family, even if it's just a dog, maybe just a partner. So I wonder, as a police officer, as a chief of police, how do you feel about the protests, the discussions about policing, people saying things about what police are, what police aren't? Just how do you feel?
A lot of mixed emotions. Yeah, I mean, police officers are, for something that happened halfway across the country, we're being blamed for something that we had no control over here in Massachusetts, and here particularly in Falmouth. Like I said in the beginning and whatever, we have some great men and women in this police department. It's hurtful. I mean, I feel the pain of everybody, from the protesters to the community, how they're feeling. There's a lot of mixed feelings. There's a lot of mixed emotions. But those same things are right here in the police department, because our police officers do the same thing. They have families. They work in this town. Their families work in this town. Their kids go to school. So it's difficult on all avenues.
Thank you. It is difficult. We're dealing with some really difficult subject matter, and emotions are really high. in communities across the country. And I'm just thankful that we live in Falmouth, and there's so much work being done, and there's so much more to do. So we're hopeful that No Place for Hate will continue these conversations as time passes, and that we see the results of work being done, such as the anti-bias work that Megan's describing between the collaboration of the town and the school system and such. And I'm going to give you an opportunity, Reverend Mebane. I've been saying your name just a little off for the entire show, and I do apologize, but you're so valued here, and I'd love to hear your next question.
Oh, thank you so much, Marie. Thank you for your moderating this very informative conversation. And I want to say to you, Chief Dunn, I'm so grateful for your leadership. You were one of the first persons I went to see when I came to town, and I very much enjoyed that conversation. And I just was, I just respect you and the work you're doing, and I'm glad that we're in this town together. So I have a whole lot of other questions, but I'm hopeful that No Place for Hate, thank you to them, will continue these conversations because there is much more to be discussed. So I'm going to give you a softball maybe question here for my final. Where is the town of Falmouth with body cameras?
Body cameras. We've looked at them. The cameras aren't expensive. Where the cost comes in is the storage of the data. It is something that we would have to negotiate with the unions. It's a piece of equipment that they'd have to carry. What I will share with you, we are in the process. We have talked with our command staff, our lieutenants and our sergeants, and we did have those conversations. And where we're going to start with is with the in-vehicle cameras. In fact, we even have a grant that we're going to be purchasing a couple of in-vehicle cameras to start with. And we've looked at body cameras. Most police departments on the Cape have looked at them over time. But again, it's the towns it could bankrupt some towns what it costs to store some of that data. But again, that whole process, it's something that we can consider and talk further, but we'd have to talk with the unions to negotiate with them as we move forward with that.
Mr. Huff, do you have a final question for us?
Not a question, but it's more of a comment, if you don't mind. Will, you just took my last question. I was going to ask the chief on the body camera, so I got to move on. But I hope I don't ramble here, but my comment has to do with the listening session that Onjalé had organized, I think it was last summer, with the diversity group. We basically ran the transcription of it in the enterprise. And I just, in preparation of tonight, I read it again. And I found myself squirming in my seat because I read a lot of these, these comments, and I thought, geez, do I do that? And maybe I do, and I'm not even aware of it. We go about our lives and worried about so many things, the economy, COVID, all kinds of things. And we don't always, put the focus on the issues of race and bias, prejudice. I'm basically a good person, but, I'm sure I'm guilty of it. But we're talking about body cameras, violence, really problem people, but some of it's kind of subtle in a way. And I was thinking about when Megan talked about housing, affordable housing, and as a community, we talk about it all the time, but the truth is we really don't want to build it, because if we really wanted to, we would. And I think when it comes to race, prejudice, bias, it's the same kind of thing. If we really want to confront it, it takes some real effort. So, well, that's all I can say. We got to look at the subtleties as well as the overt examples.
Exactly, I agree. And I think this is a start to doing some of that work. And I know that No Place for Hate will be doing a series of different workshops and educational events that will help towards that end. I just want to end with one question from one of the people who sent in a question. We're getting close to the 8:30 hour, and I'd like to close on time, but I think this question is appropriate to end on. What can citizens in the community or local government do to make Falmouth or any town safe and make the job of the police easier?
Communication. And again, that's part of our police department here. And that I wanted to mention before I forget, because I've forgotten twice here. We already have 2 officers who are liaisons with No Place for Hate. They attend their meetings, they attend their functions, and we did that so that there'd be open lines of communications, so that if there are issues in the community, they share that with our officers and they bring them back and we deal with that, as well as we can share information with No Place for Hate that they may not know is going on in the community. But also part of that is when you say what can you do better for the community, is we have many officers assigned to different business groups, different neighborhoods in the community, and these officers attend their monthly meetings and things like that. But what it does is it gives face-to-face. They get to know the officer and share information with that officer, what is going on in their little community. Even though Falmouth is a community, as you know, we've got villages, you've got different associations, and the different businesses and things like that. So we've been doing that for quite a while, and there are many. I think there's like 32 different liaison groups through the community, and one of them being No Place for Hate, that we have officers assigned to. We even have them assigned to the schools so that they can go to the schools and talk to the principals and the teachers when they have questions. It breaks down the barriers. So you're not just picking up the phone and talking to a police officer on the phone that you don't know. You actually know this officer, and you can share any concerns at all, and they bring them back to the police station and we'll deal with them and we solve them together. That's what community policing is all about, is solving community issues together.
Thank you.
Marie, could I just respond to that just on a institutional, just if we're talking about townwide? I think it has layers. So the first layer is what Bill, spoke about, which is people, here I'm talking to everybody, but I'm sort of in particular talking about white folks really looking inside and doing some of that work that Bill was talking about, thinking about, this isn't about whether someone's a good person or bad person, right? It's about reflecting on how we're interacting with the world. What are those biases that we have that we carry with us? And there's so many resources that people can do that for themselves. And that's that internal work that people can do. And it's holding our institutions accountable. This is part of that process, and there are many ways that can happen. The beauty of local government, I always say to folks, folks who work even at the State House, their constituents aren't sitting 6 feet across from them at a meeting. In this town, you're 6 feet across from the folks that are running the community or making policy decisions about the community, and people should feel empowered to come to those meetings or write to the Board of Selectmen, write to the chief, write to the town manager, say this isn't, this is an interaction I had that wasn't right, that didn't feel right. Same with our schools, which is unfortunately the place where so many of our young people first encounter racism and prejudice. So holding our government accountable and doing that individual work. And, the last thing I would say is, turning to those places that, really are able to support us as we do some of that tough work. Reverend Mebane, you are the caretaker, capital T, capital C. You're a caretaker for people who, when they're doing some reflection, whether it be about this or other issues, we have a lot of support in this community, whether it's our tremendous faith community or organizations, some of the work that is coming out of the group that Onjalé is part of, you know, there are so many places for folks to do the work that then allows them to turn their focus in a meaningful way to that institutional work. So I just hope that people continue to, you know, really reflect internally, but act externally, because that's what the government is here to really improve on. So, you know, I always say to people, we love the criticism as a select board. That's when we are better. That's when we learn, not from people saying, oh, you're doing a great job. We appreciate that. But the critique and the criticism is when we are at our best. So I hope that folks, just from my position as a select board, we want to hear from people when we are falling short.
So I want to thank this panel of experts from the community, these leaders in our community. You were very informative. I'd like to thank you, Chief Dunn, for being willing to start this conversation and to keep it going so that the community can have this level of transparency and get the answers to the questions that they are seeking. I'd like to thank No Place for Hate for producing and bringing this show together, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue. We have several questions left unanswered, and I know the Chief would love to continue and answer these questions. Also, I would like to thank FCTV for being our technical host and putting this flawless show together and doing a great job with that and getting this information out to you on channels 13 and 15. And again, thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Onjalé. Thank you, Reverend Mebane. Thank you, Chief Dunn. Thank you, Bill Hough. And thank you, Megan Braga English, for all of your expertise. And again, we will continue this conversation, and thank you for viewing.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Marie.
Good night.
Thank you.